We all have a job in the family, and mine is time management.
That's got to be a rough job sometimes.
Hey, you have no idea.
Hello. It must be me you're talking about.
No, I'm just talking about all of you. All of you. Trying to keep all my baby ducks in a row.
That's why are you
I'm a baby duck. I have a little trouble hearing you, Keith. I can hear everybody else, I think.
Fucking serious? You can kiss my ass. We just had a whole thing about this fucking microphone, and I thought I had it sorted. Let's see.
No,
you do now.
It's better.
I think you're right in fucking front of me, I guess.
All right. I was just all over him about his microphone, Dad. So this is not about you. This is about.
Well, he deserves it.
A pre.
Welcome to Dead Headspace. I'm your host, Patrick R. McDonough, joined always by my co-host, Brennan LaFaro. Say hi, Brennan.
Hello, everybody.
Today,
hi, Brennan.
Hey, Joe.
Today we are talking with arguably Brennan and my favorite family in the industry, the Lansdales. 3 of the 4 Lansdales. That is Joe Lansdale. Say hi, Joe.
Hello.
Kasey Lansdale. Say hi, Kasey.
Hello.
Last but not least, the bastard that has good hair and a beard, Keith Lansdale. Say hi, Keith.
Hi, Keith.
Yeah, so we've had all you guys on before, and we're not going to go through the basic question of, what got you into horror, this and that. I want to talk about family, because we came up with this idea last year for Meet the Lansdales because, and touch on anything that you guys want to touch on. This is a few points, so grab whatever you're most comfortable with at first. Your mom, Kasey and Keith, your mom, Karen, she founded the HWA, which was Howl. Just Howl. Okay.
It was originally Horror Occult Writers League, and then it was Horror Writers of America. Now it's the Horror Writers Association.
There we go. So that's a big deal. It's not talked about that I personally see, although my sample size is just me, really enough. And I think that there is kind of a lack in just appreciation and education in horror in general. So that's something I do want to touch on. But first off, I kind of want to touch on family and what it means to you. Let's start with you, Kasey. It could be your family, it could be in general what family means to you. What do you want to talk about?
Well, okay, it's funny you mentioned about mom creating Howl, because I was just on a call with my boyfriend, and we were kind of talking about how my mom is kind of everywhere but nowhere. And even how you invited her to be on this call, and as Keith said, she's not really one for the spotlight, and that has been always the case. I'm actually cleaning out and going through some of my old books, and I'm finding where she co-wrote or co-edited. And I was telling Jonathan all these things on the phone. I said, I keep finding all these things that mom did that I don't think people know. And he said, well, I'm laying out. So as an aside, I think we talked about last time, Pandy Press is happening. So we've got this company. So he's laying out a book for Dell House. And he said, well, I'm laying out this book for Dell House, and in the photo credit, it says author photo, Karen Lansdale. And I'm like, see, she's everywhere. And it's sort of an unbelievable thing that I think we have all taken for granted. And we're just now kind of starting to see how much she contributed and how much she did to put us all in a position where we can have a conversation like that. So just a segue off of the Howl moment. But
sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just, and as for family, it's really great that we can come on and do a call like this and have a fun conversation, and we all have something in common, but we all have our own take. We all have our own thing. And even as Keith was saying sort of before, he has his daytime job that he does, that he enjoys. And then he also gets to write comic books and screenplays. And, it's just, we all have these other interests, but we're tied together by this core interest of creation, of art, of fiction, of just doing things together as a family, even if it's not a creative venture.
Yeah, what? This is so probably out there, out of left field, but have you ever thought, for you, Kasey, that that there's a very realistic chance that at your own concerts, for those that don't know, Kasey's also a musician, that there's probably quite a few artists that you are a fan of and you may not even know are watching you. Has that ever crossed your mind?
I don't know that I think of it in that way. It's an interesting question. And it's one I've never been asked before. But what I do know is that when I talk to people, many times, the people that are attending concerts or interested in the music that I create or anything that I create, they are oftentimes artists themselves, maybe artists that didn't pursue their dream in the same way that I did, but they're doing it differently. They are often a crossover of writers are often musicians are often writers, and that can translate into fiction writing, that can translate into songwriting. So it just seems that the people who attend and appreciate the arts, no matter what it is, there is a crossover. Now, of course, there are people who just enjoy listening to music, there are people who just enjoy reading the books, but there is a sort of unspoken camaraderie of the people who are also creators. And oftentimes you see that, even coming to a book signing, sometimes the author will be there with a guitar and they'll talk about the music that they played when they wrote the work. It doesn't always have to be someone who's actually putting fingers to an instrument. It's sometimes the soundtrack, if you will, of their work has driven them forward to create this art. And I just think there's a lot of cross up, more than I think about, is this person a fan in that way?
Wow, you're smart. That's a good answer. Keith. Oh, wait, before Keith, Joe, you were going to say something. I have no idea what it was. Do you?
Oh, I was just going to say my wife also had some photography that was used in a DVD that she misplaced. I don't even know where it is, but there was photos she took in Spain, and they were used for some kind of thing that I don't even know what it was, because she never really, made much point of it. And I was always so excited about it, but she was like, nah, that's what I did. And, it's funny. We were doing a doctor visit not long ago, and the guy, my wife, of course, immediately started promoting me. And that's what she did. She started talking about, I did this, and then her kids did this. And the guy's, oh my God, Happen Leonard, I read all those things. And I said, well, you hear about these horror organizations. Without her, there wouldn't be these horror organizations. And even Horror Writers Association led to spinoffs of other organizations. And so it really is that she's had her fingers in that pie a long time. She's written stories with me. She's done anthologies. And, she's very important to this field. There are a lot of kids now that don't really know her, may not even know me, but they have no idea. They're members of HWA. They have no idea that McCammon came up with the idea, Karen created it, put it together, and Dean gave it money, and made it look a little glossier. But they don't even know their own history and legacy, let alone read anything that's 4 years old, older than 4 years,
The thing, and I'm not asking for your comments on this, but my opinion to voice out there is it's worth asking, why wouldn't there be a About Us history found in all that? For me, I like that, when I'm learning about something.
There ought to be a Karen Lansdale Award in horror.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For the HWA, that would make perfect sense.
Yeah, it ought to be there just for general creativity.
An innovator in the field.
Or something of that nature. But anyway.
I agree. No, that's
yeah.
I'm gonna think about that. That's a very important thing to establish. Keith, let's hear from you, man.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, as far as, since we're talking about Mom, one of the things, she's always been our biggest fan. I mean, they anytime we've done anything, the reason why she's in the margins of everything is because she's always been there, making sure that anything we needed, she's there. She's pushed us every single moment. I mean, Kasey being a musician is a prime example of that. Whenever Kasey was getting her start, and people didn't know who she was, she would have the CD with her, and she'd be at a restaurant, and the waitress would come up and she would start promoting my sister right there at the table. And I'm like,
unbelievable.
These poor people are just trying to do a job, but she can't stop.
Yeah.
She cannot stop. She is our biggest fan. And it's like having a super fan all the time about everything. And it is the best thing ever. And Mom is like, I don't know. That's the reason why.
And the most embarrassing at times.
I mean, yeah, it embarrassed them. I thought it was hilarious, but either way, the point is that that's the reason why you find her in the margins of everything, is because she's always there, making sure to kind of push us through. And she's just that's just it. There's no other way around it. She's there because she's always there, and that's why you find her. But yeah, I mean, family, obviously there's a reason that we're all here. Family is very important to all of us. We definitely all go our own way, but we absolutely are one very strong unit in the beginning too. So
Yeah.
I don't think there's any aspect of us that doesn't have some fingerprint of the rest of us somewhere in there. And it's so funny when things come together like that. Creep Show episode is one of my favorite things that really kind of hit that, because that was something we as a family, and Dad, Kasey, and I wrote when we were so much younger. And then now all of a sudden it's like a big check mark on our resume, because, oh wow, the Creep Show episode, people get really excited about that. And that's something that we did, one of the earliest things that we really did together as a family. So,
and I remember that. I remember
I do
us
too. That's
and fighting,
yeah.
and I'm like, let him hang,
Yeah, I mean, we weren't like 4 or anything. I was 12 and Kasey was 8, so we're definitely at an age where we can remember those things. And it was quite the experience. We sat downstairs in what was Dad's study at the time, one on either side of us, and we mostly got along, but we had a few moments here and there where it was kind of like, no, we want this, no, we want that, but it was creative conversations, not like anything else.
Yeah,
and that was our first real stint into not only creating, but also working with each other to do so. I actually did write a children's book when I was much younger, but that was more, I told a weird story to Dad and he wrote it. This was the first one that I was old enough to really.
And your mom wrote the ending.
And Mom wrote the ending. Another prime example of Mom being part of the process. But yeah, I was not old enough to really remember. I remember I told Dad a story, but at the same time, this was one that I really remember being a part of, was this Creep Show. It was a big part of it.
It was an elaborate story.
It was.
And it was an elaborate story about ducks. There's a movie that one of my favorites when I was a kid, and is called Invaders from Mars, the original one. And I don't know if Keith watched it with me or not. I know I saw it. I think he did. But at some point he thought we were saying Invaders from Mars, and he didn't know what waders were for some reason. Those little waders you put on. So it became Invaders from Mars, and it was ducks.
It reminded me of Howard the Duck for some reason. I might have said that to you guys before.
Yeah. It was illustrated too. It was a nice little book from Subterranean.
Yeah. Yeah, I've still got it right over there. I was just looking.
I saw it.
I think I see it.
That's, what? Buyer complaint. That's the one thing I don't love is like Big Lizard and all those. I'm like, the wife is gonna cut off my balls if I buy a few more of these. So man, Brendan, take it away. Actually, I'm talking too much, buddy. Go ahead.
I just want to, kind of reinforce how much I love the idea of your mom, of Karen, being behind the scenes, not one for the spotlight, but her fingerprints being on just all aspects of the genre. I would also throw out, especially if we have anybody listening to this who is involved in the process, I know there's a lot of, I don't want to dive deep into it, but there's a lot of talk right now about potential changes in the Stoker Awards process and, transparency, and, the way votes are conducted. And if there's going to be changes there, it might be a good time to make a push for some sort of inclusion of the Lifetime Achievement Award.
I think so.
Let's put that into existence. Let's make the universe make that happen.
Let me toss out two little things about Karen, who we call Bear. Her nickname is Bear. So, but and I have a hard time saying Karen sometimes. I go, oh, yeah, Bear. And people go, what, who? But I don't mind the awards. I'm always flattered when I win, but I don't get up in the morning and think, oh my God, I got to have that Bram Stoker award, because it hadn't made one bit of difference in my career, not one. And does it make a difference? Not for me, it did. But that's not the point. It's an award received from your peers, but it's getting to where everything has its own cycles, where only certain things are read and people are supporting each other as kind of like a cabal, and that happened before. This isn't exclusive to this generation. It was happening before. It's why we didn't want to have one. We thought, why the hell do we need awards for in the first place? But then again, I got to thinking it's nice to identify and to support and give, the people in the field some sort of recognition. But anyway, that's the thing. The other thing too is that it was my wife that made me sit down and write for 3 months a story a day that I would have when she came home in case I might get a beating if I weren't finished. I didn't want to have that. And so I would do a story a day because I didn't know you couldn't do that. And I did 90 of them for 90 days, and they were all pretty dreadful. But what I did is I got a lot of it out of my system. And over 4 years' time, because back then you had 10, 15, sometimes even more magazines that you could send one story to. So it took 4 years for them all to cycle. And I got the rejection on all of them, and some of them 10 times, some of them 15 times. And I had 1,000 rejects, literally to the number 1,000. And I had a box full of them. And later on, we put some of them inside a limited edition where everybody that bought that edition got one of my rejects from that time, So, but she was the one that encouraged me to do that, and it helped me clean it out. It was sort of like shooting shit through a goose. You're getting rid of all that kind of stuff. Enough with the constipation. And then you started, I read everything. And so the more I read and the more I got what I'd read out of my system, but was influenced by the better aspects of it, the better I wrote. And I owe that to her. So I know I just wanted to add that. I know we don't want to dwell on that exclusively, but I did think it was important.
It is because it forms you, and it also forms your kids, and it also forms, I'm not trying to kiss your ass, man, but you, like King and Straub and all of them, you have literature kids. Is that the right word? You have author kids. I don't know how to say this, but writer kids, people you influence. So yeah, that impression.
Well, I never pushed them to be writers. I never, ever did. Kasey, from an early stage, her mom used to say her life was a musical because Kasey would go to Walmart and stand in the basket and sing, and she would emote and do all this, and I would go, Kasey, you need to be quieter. Mom, leave her alone. She's singing, and she was right. And Kasey would sing, and people would look at her, and she was just a little bitty thing. So we I never thought she would be a writer, a songwriter. I kind of thought would be a natural thing. And Keith got interested in journalism, and he got a degree in journalism. He worked for the newspaper for 4 years. And one reason, you don't hear about him as much as you do, obviously me and Kasey, is that because he was doing other stuff. He wasn't doing stuff that was in the, limelight. He was working in journalism, and he worked as a PR person for that, what was it, a sort of tourist railroad over in Rusk. And he got his degree in journalism after he had already been working in the paper for 4 years. And he had his own newspaper that he created. So he was doing stuff, but it's lately that he has begun to do stuff that's more out in the ether, so to speak.
I did some comics and things like that, and I had a couple.
Yeah, that's right, you did.
But
right.
I've really, I guess, gotten the bug here of late. And so that's been something that's been in the last few years. Just being able to really have a desire to do it is obviously very important. So sometimes I felt like I was pushing other agendas, some of those other things like journalism and things like that I wanted to make sure that I had under my belt. And then I kind of looked up at one point and said, yeah, I think this is the moment where I'd like to do this. And so all of a sudden I started really signing up for making sure that was part of my everyday routine.
Along those lines, sorry for cutting you off, Kasey.
No, I just said, yeah.
Pandemic sort of changed a lot of what I'm doing, because for 2 years, basically every gig I had got canceled, and income needed to be made. So, writing was something I'd been kind of in and out of for years and years. And I think because of pandemic, it really pushed me to churn out more content. And kind of like, Dad was talking about, you just sit down and you kind of clear out the junk. And I think that that's really been happening in the last couple of years for me, because it was never something I thought I would do as much as I am doing. But it also is a lot more in line with my lifestyle than the lifestyle of the traveling musician, which I also love. And that is, still a part of my life, but these last couple of years has really seen a shift just because, globally it had to. That was an interesting thing that I did not expect at this time.
Along those
Kasey.
lines,
I was just going to say, Kasey said clear out the junk, whereas Dad's expression was to shit out of a goose. So
Right. But
I just wanted to point out the difference there.
I'm elegant.
I just wanted to highlight that a moment.
it's a nice image. Lee Child, it's not an
It was
interview.
elegant goose shit.
Come on, Joe, this is serious. I was just gonna say I saw an interview with Lee Child saying that it's his belief that writers should start at a much later part in their life. Of course, it's different for everyone, but his belief is that more life experience at a certain age, I think he said 40s or 50s, is when you really.
Oh, hell with that.
I'm not saying I started writing way before that, but
yeah, it sounds like some bullshit.
Well,
but there is a different, you bring a different world awareness to it. And I think the things that, even as a songwriter, the things that I would write now is so much different than when I was 19. So, I mean, even if you don't start, maybe getting into that place where you're really feeling like you've hit your stride in your 40s and 50s more than your start.
There is some truth to that. I mean, the fact that your voice is just very different, and there's no question. The way that I wrote a lot of things when I was even in my 20s and things like that, it's more substance because I have more experience to pull from. There's no question. Before it was something closer to like a Will Ferrell comedy, which is very surface level. The jokes are funny, but they're very simple. And then as it got further and further, realized that it was more story oriented. And I definitely feel the shift when I watch some of my, read some of my older stuff. And then I look at what I'm doing now, and I can tell that voice has changed a lot. There are certain scenes that in my original first movie that I cringe at, and I'm like, ugh. And then I watch, I'm reading a script right now that we're working on. And that's one of the things that as I'm reading a lot of the lines and stuff, I'm like, man, this is like light years ahead of where I was with that other movie. And even between just that movie and The Pale Door, which I wrote this other movie before The Pale Door, but I can tell that they're just a different voice, I guess, as I'm going to keep coming back to. It really is. It feels different. It sounds different.
Writing specifically
another thing
too.
About experience. I'm sorry. I was just going to say another thing about experience. My experiences probably started a lot earlier than my kids. I mean, I was doing martial arts when I was 11, 12, 13, and I was doing it with grown men who just kicked the shit out of you. There wasn't any of this stuff about, well, that's child abuse. It was like, well, if you're going to get up here, you're going to take it. So, I did that. I worked all kinds of jobs. I grew up poor. No, not as, poor as some people, but certainly pretty poor. And, my father couldn't read or write, and everybody around me, it was, foundries or factories or things like that, which, I'm not knocking. I've done parts of that kind of thing. But what it is that I really don't think people grow up and say, when I get grown, you know what I want? I want to work in the aluminum chair plant. I just don't believe that's true, unless they want to own the aluminum chair plant. But I don't think people grow up to say, my life is going to be great because I'm going to be we'll drive a forklift in an aluminum chair plant. People fall into those things and end up doing them, and nothing wrong with that. I'm
just going to interrupt you and say that someone on this call literally fell in while they were driving a forklift at the aluminum chair plant.
This is true. I drove it off of the side and stuck the forks in the ground. And,
you're what OSHA makes videos of.
on the forklift were taken away.
So,
but it makes a difference what kind of experiences you have and when. If you're growing up just to work in, work in education or something like that, you're going to have different experiences. That doesn't mean they're bad, but it means they're different. I mean, my kids, my wife and I, we did all those things, and we thought we're going to make sure our kids don't have to do those things. So they're starting from a different place. But on the other hand, they've had experiences we didn't have, and we gave them opportunities to have experiences we didn't have when we were young, like travel all over the world and doing things like that, so everybody's different. So and like Keith, he's always wanted a job, and then Kasey's always not wanted a job. And I didn't want a job either. I mean, I had them, but my deal was.
Don't get me wrong. I don't want a job, but I don't.
Yeah, you don't want
like
a job.
I do want to have an income that I can count on. I am a
What
fan
is that
of
about?
food.
Tell me more about that.
Healthcare.
Yeah, exactly.
401k.
There's some things that I need
Kasey
to have.
and I are living on a shoe shine and a prayer.
Yeah, and that's the difference. Like right there, it's more along the lines of I need a certain level of stability to feel comfortable, and they just don't like to feel comfortable.
I've got a Band-Aid and a stick of gum.
They're just flying by the seat of their ass all the time.
Well, you're right. And there were times when I thought, whoa, that's tough.
Brennan, jump in, man. I don't know what points to take.
I was going to take us back to well, it wasn't back at the time, but the whole idea of when is the right time to start creating, whether it's writing or music. And I would never dare to say there is a right time. Everybody's experience is different. But as somebody who started writing, later in life, I first started writing in my mid-30s. I think, such a huge part of writing is being well and widely read. And I feel like at different points in your life, you just digest books and information so differently that I don't know that had I tried, writing 15, 20 years ago, that I would have found anything resembling success and, might not have stuck with it. I think just my understanding of literature and the way I could internalize storytelling, I feel like I started exactly when I need to. And I think that's definitely some people's experience, whereas some people are able to go up in front of the class at 7 years old and bullshit for 20 minutes and the teacher doesn't know. And good for them, because I never had that ability. But
yeah, I mean, I don't think there's like a certain. All right, you do yours.
No, I'm just going to say it's funny he said that, because when I saw my old first and second grade teacher, she was both of them. I was at her house and she was old, with 80s and nearly 90s. She said, "You see that chair up the front of the house?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "You recognize?" I said, "I think I do." She said, "When I wanted to grade papers, I put you up there and told you to tell stories, and you'd tell the story entire class, and I grade papers." And that was the first and second grade. So, Keith?
Yeah, no, there's no set age. I mean, the thing is that you start writing when you find your voice, and anything that you do before that, it's going to be that. Well, let's just say what comes out of a goose, as Dad so elegantly put.
No,
it's
early, it's cringy, like you were saying.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. And really what you're doing when you're reading is it's not like you're collecting a certain amount of words read and then all of a sudden you can write. You're learning the art of storytelling. You're learning the art of, working a story arc. You're learning character development. And so it's not the reading, it's the ability to learn that. And some people, like Dad is a prime example, he just came out of the womb with understanding story. So I don't think reading's ever hurt him on that, but I think that he's been on the, he's absolutely, he's read everything. But the thing is that he's been telling great stories way before he read everything. He understood storytelling, and that is
comic book.
That is what you pick up from reading, is that very act.
Yeah. The comic books helped me a lot. I started writing when I was 4, and I didn't write daily. I was a kid, but I wrote a lot, and I wrote all the way through up until, I was, Karen and I got married. We were both 21. And then at that point, I started writing somewhat, and then I began to write I sold the first thing I ever wrote, which was a nonfiction piece. I sold all of my nonfiction pieces, but I wanted to be a fiction writer, and that took me 2.5 years. And then I was selling fiction. And then by the time 8 years after I sold the first thing, I was a full-time writer and have been ever since. So for me, I just came at it different because I was coming from a different place. And I think, too, that times were different. And I think stories were helpful to me to deal with a lot of the stuff around me that I wasn't interested in. I had great parents. I I never felt like I was like an outsider, although I knew in some ways internally I was, but I always was popular. I got along with kids. I didn't get bullied because I was a fighter. I wasn't necessarily a good one at first, but I would fight back. And, I never had that experience of being the dweeb, so I come at it from a different background. So everything's different for me than it might be for someone else,
Yeah, that's true. There's definitely a lot of variables to why people are the way they are. That's why there's not one right path for being a writer.
I think I cut a lot of mine on journalism. I mean, I that's because even when I write, when I send it to Dad, there's a lot that when he writes back and says, hey, this is what I like or what I dislike. But one of the things that he said to me multiple times is that it comes off in the same way journalistic writing comes off. It's very quick to the point. It doesn't, it's real lean. And that's the thing, is that I've learned to tell a better story, but I really learned to write lean writing for the newspaper, because that's one of the things they tell you is that most people aren't going to read past the headline, and most of them aren't going to read past the first sentence, and what's left, most of them aren't going to read past the first paragraph. So you learn to get very, very punchy, very, very quick, because I'm sure I wrote thousands and thousands of words that went in the newspaper that only my mother read.
I read them. And the other thing too is it's interesting with the kids because Keith has that style, and I think journalism can limit you, but I think a lot of things can, but I think it is one of the best, because I also was in journalism in high school. I lettered in journalism. I have a jacket that has an inkwell on it, and so I lettered in journalism. So
I didn't know that was a thing.
Tremendous amount. Yeah, I learned a tremendous amount from that.
That just get you beat up now.
Yeah, I know. But back then it didn't. But the thing is that Kasey, on the other hand, and I noticed this when we did a reading where all three of us read stories at an event, and Kasey's is more poetic without being purple poetry. And I think that's because she's a songwriter, so she has that influence where Keith has a journalism influence and I'm some other kind of influence. In some ways, Keith and I think more alike putting stories together, but Kasey and I write more alike and express things more alike. And I know that when Kasey and I were writing some of the Dana stories, one of us could go to the bathroom and the other person could just pick up on it and go,
Do you think with that type of lean, snappy writing, Joe's is directed at you, but Kasey and Keith jump in if you want at any point, of course. Brain not working right now properly. Do you think that with lean writing like that, you can get away? I don't know how else to word it. Do you think you can get away with absurd scenarios more easily, more naturally, such as the drive-in series? Or do you think that is just kind of your execution, or are neither of those things true?
The trick to writing something absurd is to ground it in something that makes sense. And it doesn't have anything to do a lot of times with how absurd something is. So, just about any story worth telling has something that you've twisted on its head, or why tell it. But the thing is that if everything else makes sense within the universe, then you can get away with just about anything, which is why one of those moments that end up, that's where that whole jumping the shark comes from. It gets to a point where it's like, look, you've had a certain amount of, we're willing to come along with you, but now all of a sudden it's getting ridiculous. And it could have been absolutely over the top ridiculous, but it's been that the entire time you've been in the story. But all of a sudden it's like, that feels a little bit outside of what we're letting you get away with. And I think that really has more to do with anything else, as long as it makes sense in the universe itself.
That makes sense. Yeah, for sure. Brennan,
a thing I would say is about the drive-in. If you have good characters, people will buy almost anything too.
That's
the characters seem real.
Too.
But there's some things like the drive-in. It has characterization in it, but the book is the character, the style, and the book. An example of that is Kurt Vonnegut. He really doesn't have much characters at all. What his strength is the book is the character, and that's harder to do than you think. And not many writers I know do it. And I think many writers get caught up in, I'm just going to be scary, or I'm just going to be gross. And those are tools, but they aren't the craft. The craft is bigger than that, and I think that it's important that people understand that, it really has to do with either, as Keith said, grounded in some points in reality, but also in the characters. But there are some books and stories where the story itself is the character.
Yeah, that's really true.
Mind blown shit. Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, there are certain things that are only there because, like, I'll give you a good example. Like M. Night Shyamalan is one of, the things that everybody's seen his stuff. Everybody has,
Sure.
But he's not a great writer in almost any way, but he is a great idea guy. The thing is that the ones that fall short aren't because the ideas are bad. It's because he's just not a great writer, but he's got interesting ideas. He does. And he's willing to do something that may not be like, completely grounded, but the idea is so interesting that you're willing to be there for it. So that's a time that I would say that it's not always well grounded. It's not really well characters. The dialogue's not fantastic, but M. Night Shyamalan is a household name.
Yeah, that's a good point. I did like
Kasey wrote this story I was reading, and as I was reading it, the atmosphere was just so thick and the prose was so beautiful. And I would get lost into that, and she could have told me anything and I would have believed it because of the conviction and the way it was written. Now that's the other tool I was talking about, is that if you can do that, people will go along with you. And if you just have a story where this happens, that happens, that works stronger with idea pieces. But if you have stories that have mood and texture, which is really like a song expanded and explored, and she read something not long ago, and I said, God damn, this is literature, And then Keith is also a good idea person. I think he probably a better idea person than me. I can convince you I have good ideas, but I don't know that they truly are. I think Kasey and I are similar in that way. We can convince you.
I want to tell you a story. I just don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Keith, what am I talking about?
How'd that reading go, by the way? It looked pretty fun.
You know what?
A
It
lot
was
of
great,
fun.
but it was hot. It was so hot.
Yeah, I mean, it was hot. And of course, we did run out of time, and I had to hold a flashlight for Dad to read, which honestly, I know it just drove him crazy. But I thought that was like such a fun moment that I'm going to look back on all the time of like, I remember having to hold the flashlight for Dad while he read a story, and like,
Keith said something about how kids talk about they're holding the flashlight for their dad while they're working on a car, which I did for my dad many times. And he was holding the flashlight for his dad while he worked on the story or read it.
Yeah, that was the punchline that I had for a lot of time after that, because I just thought it was so funny. So yeah, all those memories that kids have of holding the flashlights for their dad, I got one now too, but by God, mine's different as hell.
That tops all the others.
Keith's humor too in his stories is in the setup, and Kasey's is in the language and in the dialogue. It doesn't mean that they don't both do that to some extent, but I've always thought that Keith's, what makes his strong is the setup. And it's a lot of what you call dry humor. I guess is that the right word I'm trying for? That
like Seinfeld.
It's set up. To some extent. Yeah. To some extent, it's more like the setup makes it funny. And then Kasey's dialogue is so witty that I think it's funny. I think it's important to be able to do all of it, but you're going to find that there are certain degrees of things that you as a writer can do. There's none of that stuff about you're going to learn to do everything. You're going to learn to do everything better, but you're not going to learn everything. I'll be writing something new and go, oh my God, I just now learned something. I didn't know that. And I've been doing this all my life. And I'm always, it's the same way with martial arts. I think, I've been doing that lock, that throw, that strike all my life. And now there's a better way of doing it. Why didn't I see this before?
Yeah, that's great. Brendan, jump in, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned the drive-in earlier. And one thing I wanted to make sure that we brought up is there's an anthology coming out called The Drive-In Multiplex, and it's edited by Brian Keene and Chris Golden. And I could spend the rest of the episode just listing off all the contributors, including Keith and Joe. But what I'm interested in is with the variety in names, older names like David Scow, newer names like Aaron Dries, Gabino Iglesias. What is it about that series of stories that is so inspirational to like not a generation, but generations of horror writers? I'd love to hear anybody who wants to contribute's take on that.
That's Dad's to answer right there. I could give you my guess, but he's the man with the answer on this one.
I don't know that I have an answer. I think there was a sincerity of goofiness in it. You know, I started telling, and I think I actually captured the voice of teenagers. And because, you know, when I wrote that, I was older, but I was still not so far removed from being, you know, young in the 20s and going to drive-ins, a teen going to the drive-ins. And I have a great memory for emotion, and I can remember how you felt at a time. And I think that that's an important thing for a writer. And for me, I think that's what the drive-in does. Is it captures that coming of age, the curiosity, and you thinking you know every damn thing, and then suddenly realizing you don't know anything. This ain't right. This is different. But then you use that to make the book work. It's not just a series of goofy events. It's a series of ideas linked by satire. And also there's a whole lot of, you know, I think social commentary in that. And even if you don't get that, the younger readers will always go, oh, it's so funny. It was so wild. And other people go, oh my God, that was grim, which is where I was. I thought it was grim, funny, but grim. And the humor made it even grimmer to me. But I thought it was always a statement on mankind, on humankind. And I didn't mean I had answers, but it damn sure meant I had questions, you know. And I think that feeling, that novelty of it as well, of being a drive-in, you can't leave, and you're there with a bunch of adolescents who have been used to their parents solving their major problems, and now they got the popcorn king. So outside of that, I really don't know anymore.
I think it's definitely one of those stories that the absurdity grounded in reality, and that reality is exactly what he's talking about. It's that social commentary of people cannot be left to their own devices when something like that was to occur. I don't think that, you know, it's the most like, oh, this is definitely something that can happen. It's the farthest away from that, but it's that absurd craziness grounded in what is already us as humans are awful people anyways. So once you put the absurdity and you mirror it against what actually we are, which is awful people, I think that's the reason why it actually sticks with people, is because the true horror is, hey, look at all this scary shit, and then it's like, wow, the worst thing about it is the thing that we actually should be able to control.
And the monsters aren't the monsters, it's the people.
Right. The humans are the worst monster, as they say.
I got so many thoughts.
Kasey says, I hadn't read that.
It's one of I read a lot of his work, but it's one that I went, that's not for me. I'm sure of that. I know all about it because I've spent my whole life hearing everybody's take on it. And it just continues to affirm that, like, probably not my jam.
It's not a feel-good story of the year for sure, but
yeah,
it's
and also because it's Dad, so it's a little bit weird. You know, it's like not only sometimes I have I am highly intuitive and empathic and all the feels, and so there are times
you got feelings.
I got all the feels. And so there are times when stories I think hit me double hard, because not only do I feel that way, but because when it's your parent, there's a whole other level there. So when you already are somebody who's sort of a little more prone to that, and I think that those are things that I don't necessarily need to go to that dark spot that Dad had in his brain. I don't need that in my psyche. I don't know if that makes sense.
There's also a lot of moments. There's also a lot of moments in reading Dad's stuff that I know when I'm reading it, I'm like, I know what the real story of this is. Like Dad pulls on a lot of absurd shit that happened to him, you know, throughout the years. And a lot of people would think, there's no way that could really happen. And I'm like, I remember this story happening. I remember how he told the story of it really happening. You know,
exactly.
One of the prime
that connection, it's hard.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not as dainty as Kasey, I guess. I'm just like, all right, I got to get through one of Dad's sex scenes here. But
It's
at
not
the
easy,
same
man.
time, there's stuff like the night
Hit
they
the
missed
rewind
horror
button
show.
on that phrase.
Yeah, the night they missed the horror show is one of those things that's like, grounded in reality. And if somebody else read it, they think, boy, what a weird, absurd story, until you hear Dad's real account of it, and you're like, oh wow, that's awful.
Well, and I don't
Yeah.
tend to read by anybody that type of horror. I tend to read more crime, thriller, and mystery, and that's just my preference. So whether that was written by Joe Lansdale or another writer who I respect and or don't know, that's just not my go-to. My go-to has always been more of a thriller, something even with a more supernatural element. So I love horror for the genre, and I love parts of it, but it's not my go-to reading. I'd rather watch a horror movie and read a mystery. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, Kasey always said she was Lansdale light. I always thought that was funny, because there's a certain truth in that. I think that there is that connection, for maybe more for Kasey than Keith, of it being me and having elements of she probably recognizes things in my life and things that I'm talking about. She knows how deeply those affected me, because I'm often writing about things that upset me or bothered me or that I dealt with in life. I think
the explanation is I find it very upsetting to know how upsetting it is to you.
I'm on the other side. I'm on the other side of it.
About how upsetting it is.
I like to share in that, because I like to know, because it's honestly, it's a window into Dad in a lot of ways. And so the fact that there's shit that bothered him enough that he's taken some absurd version of it and ran with it. Sometimes to me, it's kind of like me getting to know Dad from a level that most people aren't going to have the option to, because it's something that I know the background, I know the person. And so once you add that into the works, I'm getting something that feels very unique and special. And
it's emotional. It's emotional biography.
Absolutely.
Autobiography.
And it really is. And the thing is that I don't think Kasey's any lesser for not being able to do that. I think that Kasey's always been the more emotional of the group. She's always been somebody that when things are heated, Kasey's emotions are always the ones that we hear. And so
why she writes good songs.
And
why she writes good songs.
It's why she does a lot of good things well. It's because she cares from a level that it's really hard to understand if you don't have that level of care. But there's a reason that I see Kasey doing 10 times the work sometimes. And I think that honestly, just to pull it all back around, let's get a little call back here, but I think it's because that's who Mom is. And the thing is that Mom, the reason why she didn't do a lot of the limelight and she didn't do a lot of the things is because she doesn't really want the emotional baggage that comes with some things. That if you have something that is,
good point,
really going to sit with you, then it comes with a certain amount of obligation. There's an easy example, which doesn't really apply, but just so that I have a great example here, it's the reason why people write and then never share it with anybody, because they're so scared of that rejection. They are worried what somebody else might think about their work, and that's an emotional block for people. And that's why there's people like Dad that's just like, I wrote a lot of bad shit and I put it out there, because it is an important part of the process. Getting through that is just as important as anything else. And so my point, to kind of bring it back around to the other way, there is a lot of emotion that comes into this, and there are some people that process it very differently. And I think Kasey is somebody who she processes it. She can't process that raw from Dad because it's such a chunk to swallow. Whereas I think it's really interesting. I think she just takes it through a different funnel.
I take it through every fiber of my being. And
I believe that. I honestly believe that. Yeah.
To toe. And so there may be something, and it's interesting to hear your take on it, because you're not wrong. You're not 100% right, but you're not 100% wrong at all. It's like it's hard to explain, but I think that's right. Because the reason you're right is because you're right. And the reason you're wrong is because I also do it with his other work,
right.
But
well,
it's
there's
different.
also the other side of things is that, and we all want to know that how does somebody see you through a certain lens? Because even though we are family, there's always I will never know 100% of anybody because that's just who we are as a species. But I feel like I can say probably in the high 90s% for at least everybody that's in our family, and that's what I feel a lot of as far as my own observation with that process. That's
Well,
my
and you and I are very different in very
Absolutely.
similar in some ways, but
Yeah.
very different in other ways.
Kasey and I are. There's no question.
And it's a sort of a fascinating sociological experiment. But
It's like me and my brother. My brother and I are very much alike in some ways, but in other ways, not at all. You know, we're very different.
It's eerie with Kasey and I because Kasey and I both have the absolute same when it comes to problem solving, but her and I, the way we get to the answer after we've figured out the problem, we take two different roads. We both use the same logic to get to the answer, but then we both solve it very, very differently. There's no question there.
Somebody in this family has to have some tact, you know.
I haven't seen that one, but
You know, one other thing I wanted to add, and I think this is important to say, is that I am a great fan of horror. I grew up with it. I watch the movies. I love it. But, you know, horror is not all I think about, and it's not all I write. And I don't consider myself a singular writer of any genre because I've actually written more novel-wise. I've written far more crime, thriller, historical, Western.
I think that's
even,
it for me
even
too. Is I
fantasy.
don't consider you a horror writer. I consider you a crime writer who's written some horror, and so
Yeah,
that
I've written some dark things.
yeah. It's I don't know. It's funny.
Part of the focus here is obviously we got this podcast that's very horror focused, and so
Says who?
Who's that? Who we talking about? But my point is
What you say?
that, yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us fit in a box. I mean, I can definitely look back at what I've written, and a lot of it's horror, but it's because that seems to be what there's a high demand for. And so when somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, will you write this?" It's almost always horror because there's such a desire that people reach out. The other stuff that I write, it's more, this is the stuff that I want to write. It's more interesting to me, but I definitely feel like I probably wrote more horror than anything else, but it's never been my own choice to do so. It just was what was mostly requested.
Well,
Keith liked comedy a lot. Keith and his mom were much more interested in comedy.
I do.
You know, I'm interested in humor more than comedy. I mean, I like that too, but I'm more interested.
I like putting a character in a shitty situation and then enjoying myself out of it while they maybe die.
You know, yeah, Joe, you man, I'm just going to focus on one point. The not being pigeonholed. I see that with people in my generation far too often, and I don't ever want to do that at all, ever, because like you guys, I like a whole lot of shit, you know, like a random good example is Benjamin Franklin. Sure, he's known for one thing, but he's to this day, without him, this country would not be what it's like because of how many different things he's touched. You know, another good example is.
Did you know he was in the Swimming Hall of Fame?
I did not know that.
He was an early swimmer, and he was famous for how fast he could swim and how well he could swim. And he is in the Swimming Hall of Fame, which they put him in, of course, in retrospect. But and it's like Lincoln's in the Wrestling Hall of Fame. Lincoln was a great wrestler. I think he only lost
that
one
doesn't
wrestling
surprise
match.
me at all.
Yeah, he was a big man too. But he was noted for his wrestling. So and then Benjamin Franklin was known for his swimming. If you need some unimportant shit, I'm the right guy to come to.
Welcome to lunch with Dad.
You know, there's one topic I think I'll beat you in, and that's the Korean War. That's about it. Everything else you got me beaten, man.
Yeah. Well, you know, I had a Daito Ryu instructor who was in Chosin. You know, and he was in that, and he said they called it a retreat. He said we were running like hell. I remember him saying that. Yeah.
Yeah. Most people are probably going to say, what the fuck are you talking about? So all I got to say is he's a lucky son of a bitch to even be alive.
Yeah, he thought so too. Yeah.
Brendan, I got mush brain today. Can you help me out here for the 100th time?
One thing that really stuck out to me, and this was like 10 minutes ago, and I'm still thinking about it, is just the notion of Keith, you and Kasey getting to, and doing it in different ways, but just getting insight into your dad through his, let's call it, literary legacy. I love that. I think it's such a beautiful point. I think it's such a unique point. It loses a little bit of its luster when when Joe says, shit, Keith, I was writing like I thought you were dead. But beyond that, I mean, it's such a way to get to know a parent that most people don't have the opportunity to get. So I do want to, we've touched on this a little bit, but if you have anything to add, I want to know what it was like to grow up in a house that was just so creativity based. I mean, like, speaking for me, my dad was an engineer. You could read his business card and his job title would put you to bed at night. I'm sure you guys, just from, with friends, you know what those households are like, where it's work. The parents are going to work, and you didn't grow up in that atmosphere. What was that like?
Well, I'm going to take this one because this is one of the favorite questions. For me, it was just like it was for you. It was just how it was. We didn't, or at least I didn't think about like, oh, my parents are doing this different thing. It's just, that's what my parents did. It never occurred to me until I was out of the house and older. So it was no different, I think, than anybody else's experience as a child in terms of, your parents have a job and they go to the office or the room or whatever it is and do the job. And then when the job is over, we're home. So we, whether that was in the study downstairs or at the office at the college or whatever it is people are doing. Clearly I don't have a job. This is whenever people go into their workplace and they do the business that gets them a paycheck. It just wasn't bizarre. And then, but as you get older, then you kind of see, and I think more than anything, what you see is how available they were. So my mother was the first female dispatch at the fire department. She also worked dispatch at the police department. And she retired when I was little. So when I was young, she was still doing 24 on, 48 off. So she was doing that, but I was so little, I don't remember. So my only memories are that my parents were always home. And if I needed something, they were available. And I think that is what stands out for me more than a job or any kind of other feeling. Was just, I always knew that if I needed something, they were both there.
Yeah, there's some definitely strength in there, because the biggest problem is that we just didn't have any other way to measure it. And
Right.
Kasey's right. We knew nothing different. I mean, other people's parents went to work, but it's just like Kasey said, we know that dad went to work, and we didn't really think much about it. I didn't realize what was going on until I was in, I don't remember exactly what grade level, but it was somewhere pre-high school grade, and dad had written some of the Batman animated series, and they asked him to come in and talk about it. And I thought, oh yeah, that'll be fun. And then everybody in there was losing their shit. And I did not realize, like, oh, this is actually like a big deal to people. People really are like losing their mind. They are just like, they can't stop asking about it. And it's one of those things that it was the first moment that I realized that dad did something that wasn't common. I mean, everybody had a job, but dad did something that not a lot of other people did. For as far as I knew, everybody had somebody that they knew that did that, but apparently that was not the case. And so, yeah, that's a prime difference there. And
Keith started going to the movie sets with me, like Bubba Hotep and things like that. And a little small one, like The Job. In fact, he had a little role in it where he walks off the bus. But he started going to those things too. And I think that also probably began to kind of go,
oh yeah, no, absolutely. It was at that moment that I realized that it was a very different thing. That was one of the whole things that when I was growing up, it just did not register. And then all of a sudden it just like, oh, this is really different. And yeah, dad's right. Going to those movie sets, that was also a big, because people, it was a kind of, and honestly, before that, like the movie sets are a great example, but I would say even before that, going to conventions, people coming up and just being starstruck, and you realize that like what he was doing was important to people that we didn't even know. And that was kind of the very first real glance into it that I had, was conventions and then movie sets. And then all of a sudden realizing that people were just like, they just couldn't believe it. Oh, wow, that's really exciting that your dad does that. And I just thought, yeah, no big deal. Or as Kasey always said, just go write something.
Well, let me tell you a little something behind that. When Kasey wanted something, like she wanted a dress or whatever it was, I'd say, well, we're gonna budget that right now, and she'd go, well, Dad, just go write something.
Yeah.
So when she got a little bit older,
Dad goes, he writes, they send us a check, and what's the problem?
Yeah.
Now he does it to me. I'll be complaining. He'll be like, well, why don't you just go write something?
But there was also things that I definitely know, and I know that there's a version of this too that goes with Kasey and the music and stuff too. But there was things that I didn't realize. The one, I mean, this is Dad's craft. He loves talking about it. I mean, he loves talking about a lot of shit, but he really loves talking about the storytelling in general. So he and I would watch something, and if it was something that maybe I liked, maybe I didn't like, he would say, well, what do you like about this? And we'd start talking about the actual story breakdown, story arcs. I didn't realize what the hell he was doing at the time. Part of it, I think, was he just wanted to talk about the stuff, but part of it was also I was getting a master class and learning storytelling. And I would imagine that there are people that would literally kill for the chance to have some of the stuff that we grew up that was just normal conversation. So that's not to say, I mean, as normal as a lot of things were, there was something there that definitely planted early seeds that I'm sure Kasey has.
But you realize it later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and you were out of the house. Because obviously you're a few years ahead of me.
Much older.
Much older. Much
older.
Extremely older.
That's not what anybody who sees us says, but all right.
So you were a few years ahead of me. So you were out of the house. And I think that was about the time when Dad started really getting invited as an international guest. So I was still traveling with parents. And so I was seeing also sort of this global response. And I think that's when it really hit me, was you start seeing people who this isn't even their first language, and they're starstruck, and they're sort of taking this all in, and you just sort of watch that and you go, oh, this isn't just a thing in our town. This is a thing that people all over the world are sort of looking at. And I see it happened the other night. I'm home visiting family, these guys. I'm at my place right now. And I went out to have dinner with some friends, and I saw somebody there, and he was kind of lurking around, and and so I'm sort of watching. I was like, what's up, man? And he came over, he's like, all right, I didn't want to do this, but they told me not to come over here, but I just love your dad's work, and they said not to bother you with it. And it's funny how many people approach it that way. And I always say, thank you. First of all, I hate to think that my family spent their whole life and career on something that nobody gives a shit about. So thank you for that.
Exactly.
And also, your support is what allowed me to have the life that I have. So I'm happy to hear that you have had a good experience because of something connected to my family, because that's why I get to live an interesting life every day. So it is funny. And I guess there's even my boyfriend, when we first met, he was saying that he told somebody that we were dating, and they were like, oh my God, ask her about her dad and Bubba Hotep and something. And he was like, I'm going to wait and see. My dog is upset. And I asked, why did you do that? And he said, well, because people have tricky relationships with their family. So in this case, we all are very sharing, but you not only see that the work has impacted, oh, baby boy, but you get to see that it has brought us closer together as a family. And that's another element of what this has done, because we get to do things like this. I mean, how many people have their parents in the same field, in the same way, and in the same sort of support system? I mean, I know a lot of people do what their parents do, but I feel like this is a different little subset of that allows us to have a different connection than a lot of families.
Oh, it
I'm gonna
definitely
let my
is.
puppy out.
Audio listeners are going to be like, who the hell is she talking to?
That's her invisible friend. We just pretend it's a dog.
Well, that's a good story. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
She broke it. She brought the dog in. Now I have to admit there's a dog. Yeah. Yeah, we do.
What dog?
You know, the thing is too, is that when Keith was a big Bruce Campbell fan. And I think it was also a revelation when he went on the set and saw, look at this guy's a guy. You know, he's an actor, but he's a guy. He's also a very good guy, by the way. I like him a lot. And
seems like a really nice
and
guy.
he got to meet Bruce. He got to meet Ossie Davis, which for me was the thing. I mean, I was like, holy shit, Ossie Davis, holy cow, you know. And that was my big moment. And then Keith, when he met Bruce, that was his favorite actor at the time. And I think it really struck him that, okay, these are all people doing a job.
Yeah,
And we're all connected in some way.
I've met a lot of famous people that by definition, but the real truth is I got real starstruck meeting Bruce, because it was like this, oh my gosh, he's the coolest, you know. I mean, I like
Yeah,
you want to talk about movies and things that are more my sort of thing, things like Evil Dead, Army of Darkness. I like that absurd humor that's in that horror genre. So that's definitely the stuff that really hit me the most, I think. So meeting Bruce was definitely,
and he's a decent human being. He's really a good person, you know.
He's a really great guy.
I really admire Bruce, and we're friends, and I'm happy for it, you know.
But yeah, and to talk on that, you guys aren't gonna be treating people like, for example, if you were to be raised in one set of social groups, you guys have a global experience. You're going to understand that everything's not about Americans or whatever it is.
Right.
That's a great lesson. You guys are really lucky to have had
and
that.
you know, yeah. And Kasey said it more eloquently, but I think it's true, is that I used to tell the kids, you remember, these people put beans on your table.
Yeah,
and you know, I would sign
remembered
books till the cows came home, but I would always say, these people put beans on your table, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think it's kind of odd, you know, we used to tell stories, but these kids, sometimes their bedtime story was old radio shows, old classic radio shows. So they were learning story. Even none of us knew we were doing that, really, you know.
Yeah, Dad and I used to listen to a lot of those radio shows, and it was like a big part of the end of our day. And so, yeah, I mean, honestly, storytelling has always been a part of something, you know. It's every single factor. But yeah, just to touch on that other thing Dad just said, it's something that he's always, not that we've ever felt otherwise, but it's always been real, like, nice to hear that Dad has stressed multiple times that without these fans, we're nobody. We are not. Yeah. We're telling stories for ourselves, but at the end of the day, if we're the only ones doing it, then we don't get to live this life. And so there's no question. And so when people come up, it's one of the things that I've done multiple times, which, and I'm sure Kasey's spotted this several times too. As you may have guessed, when Dad is anywhere, he's talking. And so he'll be in the middle of the conversation, because there is no end to the conversation, but there'll be somebody who starts to get closer and closer holding a book and a pen. And you'll start to spot them getting, you know, closer and closer.
They're waiting.
And they're waiting patiently. And I tell them all the time, I'm like, are you here for a signature? Yeah, that's okay. I'm like, Dad, because there's not going to be let's get to the end of this conversation. You have to, there we go. There's a prime example for those of that can't see.
Nice.
But yeah, no. So, and that's something that you start to spot, is people that start, and I always make sure that they are seen, that Dad is there to sign, because we know how important it is to all of us that fans are there because they love what we're doing.
Yeah.
And you know, I have an entrepreneurial story to tell. Kasey started going to conventions. She went more regularly than Keith. And so everybody knew her. I mean, all of these people, she's grown up with all these booksellers and writers and, you know, so on and so on. But what she did when she was young, she had a tooth that she lost. So she went around to all of these people at their tables and different things like that, and convinced them to give her money for her losing her tooth like a fairy. But she would always keep the tooth, and so she would do that. So she would make quite a bit. And at some point, somebody wanted the tooth, and it was like, what?
Yeah. I've always had a side hustle.
I was about to say this is
she always had a side hustle.
This is what normal people call con artist.
To back your grifter. That's hilarious.
A child grifter.
To back your point up, Keith, I planned out a 5-minute Zoom talk with your dad a while ago, and that literally was it turned into an hour conversation talking about different books and such, and it was fun. But at one point, my wife is looking at me like, I'm like, oh God. Who do I say? Who do I disappoint, my wife or Joe?
Sorry, honey.
Unfortunately, I do gotta wrap this up, guys. So if you're okay with it, let's get to those wrap-up questions.
Yeah.
All right. So the easy one: where can people follow you guys and your dogs?
Well, we're all on Twitter these days for sure.
I'm less on Twitter and more on Instagram, but I'm everywhere.
I'm on Instagram.
I have a fan page too.
On his Facebook is what he's referring
to. If you
to.
can Google, you can find us. Let's put it
Yeah, we're not hard to find. All of our stuff is our names. So except for Kasey, who's like Kasey.
I'm not on the normal Facebook page. I'm on a specific version of it. You know,
it's the fan page.
I mean, I have one. Right.
Yeah.
Fan page. And then I also have a website. www.joerlansdale.com.
That's why I'm not on Twitter, because I got hacked and I had a verified account. It was stolen, and then now I can't get it back. So I'm against Twitter. So anyway, you can find us. And Leo has my dog that I'm holding. For those of you who can't see, he has an Instagram account. He's not very active though.
Oh, that's awful.
Well, you know, a lot of people used to steal, and still do, I guess, if she gave them the opportunity, would steal Kasey's photograph and put it as their photograph. And you start looking through there and go, damn, that looks like my daughter. That is my daughter. You know, and it would be somebody else's name that they were using, but they were still. I mean, I really hate all that stuff. I do it because I want to stay connected to readers, but I really don't like it. And I wouldn't do it if it weren't for that, because there's just so much horseshit that goes on with it.
And there's a lot of creepy people too.
Social media in general is, you know, such a pain in the ass, but it's the only way to be connected to the people that we want to be connected to. So it's such a, like, it's the reason that we're all still on it, because for every awful encounter on any of those, there's great ones too. And so you just can't walk away from that.
Agreed. Anyone have final thoughts? Whoever wants to jump in. I
just thank you for having us all on. I know that's quite an undertaking. You're a brave man. So, and Brennan, I know you've been a part of this on several of the other interviews, and I just appreciate both of you guys taking the time. And
despite not being able to get a word in edgewise this time.
Yeah, man, that's what I'm trying to say. But it's nice.
We know what we're walking into when we have Lansdale. When we have one Lansdale on, never mind three.
But we appreciate it. You know, it really is nice, and it's nice to get to know you guys. You know, I feel like I'm starting to get to know you too as we have these interactions, and, you know, the circles we travel in are small. So it's just nice. It feels good to know that we're all part of the same team.
Absolutely. Yeah. We generally love you guys and really enjoy talking to you. So if that wasn't creepy enough, then wait until next time when we can talk. I just want to say that if you haven't listened to this, Bubba Hotep was brought up. That's my personal favorite. Probably will always be my favorite by you, Joe, because it's just it's so out there, but it's so touching. Not to say that the others aren't, but it's a special story. So for those that haven't seen it or the movie, read it or seen the movie, check it out. Brennan, any final thoughts? Joe or Keith, anyone? Any final thoughts?
Just thank you for having us on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not going to thank you because I don't want to be part of that group.
You don't have to. You can say "fuck you." I'd be like, I would say very good, Keith.
I'm just kidding. No, it's been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
You got it, Brendan.
Echo everything. Thank you guys for your time. I learned two things tonight. I learned that Ben Franklin was in the Swimming Hall of Fame, and I learned that there's a Swimming Hall of Fame. This is.
I'm glad that's your takeaway.
I'm a richer person now.
Very good, sir. Next episode is 156 with Danielle Cross. I said it wrong the first time. Kraus. Did I say it right anytime?
Kraus.
Nailed it. All right, listeners, you have many choices of podcasts. Thank you for picking us.